Welcome to our podcast. On tonight's show, the God of the Nations. Tonight, the gods of ancient mythology and their connection to the Bible. Where do the gods of ancient mythology actually come from? Is there any connection to the Genesis 6 narrative? And are these actually gods? Or are they Nephilim or fallen angels? And are these real events? So tonight, the gods of ancient mythology and their connection to the Bible. Get ready? Let's go. Well, the gods of ancient mythology and their connection to the Bible. Then I guess I want to kind of preface all of this with a short primer on mythology. And I think you'll understand where we're going with this, because we're going to look a little bit at the Bible, a little bit at mythology, and kind of put it together. Won't be real long tonight, but I think we're going to get to some essential information. What is mythology? Mythology is a collection of myths that include the fields of archaeology, comparative mythology, folklore, and tradition. A body of myths that deal with gods, demi-gods, and legendary heroes. Sometimes even based on real people and real events, and sometimes, yes, they're made-up stories they use to explain life. Now, mythology basically has three functions. Number one, to provide the hearer with a truth which the audience then interprets for themselves within the value of their culture. Secondly, to answer questions about life, who made the world, who was the first man, where do we go when we die, right? All those things. And number three, to justify an existing social system and account for traditional roles and customs. So every culture has mythology, but we will spend most of our time with the ancient Greeks and Romans as well, because they seem to be the most well-known, where we actually have a lot of ideas, and when we get a lot of our, we learn this in school about the gods of Rome and the gods of the Greeks. But every culture has their gods. Every culture has their legends. Every culture has their mythology. All right? Okay. Where do the gods of ancient mythology actually come from? Are they connected to Genesis 6? And in ancient mythology, is all of this really based on real events? The universal story from the Bible agrees with every major culture in the ancient world. The gods descended from heaven. They materialized in bodies of flesh. They mingled with humans. They gave birth, to hybrids that were part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids. And they are the giants of old. Now, there were legends. Legends of creation, of giants, of great flood, of even a reptilian deceiver. This is what got me. When we look at the ancient Roman culture and Greek culture and other cultures around the world, they almost all tell the same story. There's a creation. The gods come down. They have babies. They become Nephilim, giants. There's always some kind of a great flood that destroys the world. And many of these have a deceiver who's almost like a reptilian, like we know the Bible talks about in Genesis 3, that Satan came as a serpent. From Rome to Greece, from Egypt to Persia, from Assyria to the Babylonian Sumer, their earliest records of civilizations tell us of an age when powerful beings, the Hebrews called them watchers, right? We call them fallen angels, but these powerful beings came to earth. Now, the Hebrew, and by the way, you can go on some of my podcasts and go look through Mike Franzone podcast. We have some shows on the Nephilim and the giants in Genesis 6, more detailed, but I want to give some of that to you tonight. These sons of God were called the B'nai Ha Elohim, which basically means the sons of God. It was a word in the Old Testament used for angels in the Old Testament specifically. But I always listen to Genesis 6, verse 4. I want to read it from the New Living Translation, because it really helps identify what he's saying here. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of the ancient time. Now that right there tells you a whole lot. I like the New Living Translation and even the ESV. They're good, and I use the New King James Version as well. But those two translations, they try to go back to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Let me read it again. Listen real close. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. Watch. For whenever. That tells me there might have been more incursions than the one we read in Genesis 6. It's possible. There's some verses in Psalms that those angels might have come down even after that, some other watchers. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors, watch, of the ancient times. There was a day when gods ruled the earth. The legend speaks of immorality, violence, murder, sorcery, sacrifice, yes, and even cannibalism. And the Nephilim were real. We know that from the scripture. We know that from ancient history. You know, our founding early Christian fathers believed that. The early Jews and Second Temple Jews believed that. The Nephilim were real, and they became legends, and their stories survived throughout every culture. So we start with the Bible, we go through history, and almost all of these cultures have exactly the same story, told in different ways, right? Now, the story is always the same. The gods of the star people came down to earth. They chose women, produced demi-gods or hybrids. The Greeks called them titans, superhumans, demigods, right? Like Hercules, and we'll look at some of those guys as well. In ancient Greece, for example, the gods were part of everyday life. They explained the weather, they explained creation, they had religious rituals that were performed because of that, and they gave meaning to the Greeks who lived. And at the center of Roman and Greek mythology was this great pantheon of deities, of gods, small g. They were fickle humans, fickle beings who ruled over humans. They were blamed for the good and the bad. They looked like men and women, and they were giants, and they were superhuman. And they were generally considered to be mean, vindictive, self-centered, cruel, hateful, and immoral. And today, we call them devils, right? The wicked fallen angels of Ephesians 6, Colossians chapter 1, Genesis 6, all speak. Now, let me give you some examples. Let's take Hercules, okay? I can give you a lot. I'm just going to give you 3 or 4. Hercules, he is the son of Zeus. Zeus had relations, watch, with a human woman. Hercules was produced. He was called a demigod with superhuman strength. Atlas, remember Atlas? He's carrying the world. He was the son of Poseidon. Poseidon was the god of the sea. Poseidon had relations with Clito, who was a human woman. Atlas was called by the Greeks a titan. Perseus, he is the son of Odin. Odin in Norse mythology was this great god, Odin. Odin had relations with a human. Her name was Frigga. And guess who was birthed? Perseus, a demigod. And could it be Nephilim? Almost the same story. Let's go one more. Romulus and Remus, they were the founders, legendary founders of Rome, right? Okay, Mars, the god of human wisdom and the god of war. He came down and he had relations, you ready for this, with a human woman. And then these two supernatural twins were born, right, with supernatural qualities. Watch. The malevolent and troublemaking gods were descriptions, I believe, of fallen angels. You go through Greek mythology. You go through Roman mythology. And you see the gods were generally not very nice people. Could it be that they were fallen angels that came down and had sex with women? And these women produced titans or demigods or Nephilim? I think the story just goes on and on. Matter of fact, I'm going to read you now Genesis 6. I'm just going to read you 4 verses, okay? Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the Beni Ha Elohim, the sons of God, saw the daughters of men that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not strive with man forever. He is indeed flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. Listen to verse 4. There were giants on the earth in those days, and also afterward. And that's interesting, also afterward. When the sons of God came into the daughters of men, had relations with them, and they bore children to them, these were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. These are the ancient men. Now, the Nephilim, we found out, you can go back and look at some of my old videos, are bigger, faster, stronger, and evil. Very, very evil as well. They brought evil to the earth. And this is why they had the great flood. The story of the great flood, the story of the gods and giants, all of this is found in almost every culture in the world. Let's look at this. Now, I've got some of these written down. You ready for this? It's a long list. The Sumer, Assyria. All of these have the same story. Watch. Let me back up. There's creation. There's a flood. There's gods coming down, or star people coming down, having relations with human wisdom, but evil is spread. This big flood happens. Giants were created, and God cleanses the earth, and he saves a few human beings. All right, and they're all a little different, but every one of them had creation, flood, and giants. Sumer, Assyria, Incas, Egypt, Mayans, Aztecs. Remember the story of Gilgamesh. I believe Gilgamesh was a Nephilim. Australia, Taiwan, China, Greece, Persia, India, South America, Bolivia, South Sea Islands, Ireland, Korea, Japan, and watch this, the American Indians. And this is when I pull over apart for a second. Let me get some more coffee. I need some coffee on this one. And this might be hard for you to believe, but you go back and look at American Indian history. Among the American Indians, there's a flood, there's a great canoe, and they're giants. Hundreds of tribes report of red-haired tribes of giants. Ready for this? Who had 6 fingers and 6 toes. You go back to the Old Testament. There was a giant, maybe related to Goliath, that had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Their ancestors fought these tribes, and many of the Indian tribes said that they were cannibals. The Navajo spoke of giants that were 30 to 40 feet high. The Sioux, the Chickasaw, the Crees, the Alleghans, the Arapaho, the Apaches, the Carib, the Blackfoot, the Mi'kmaq, the Navajos, they all came back with the same story, all right? And by the way, I want to show you something here that might blow your mind. Giants in North America? How did they get here? You got to get this book. This book called Giants on Records. They go through thousands of newspaper articles that were written from the 1800s all the way to the 1930s. And what they do is show where giant bones were found in North America. Some buried in mounds, some buried with a number of them all together. Giants up to 10, 12 feet high. Some were only 7 feet. I mean, this actually blew me away. It would be different if I just found a few here and there. But there's one story after another, all the way to the 1930s. Many of these bones disappeared later for whatever the reason. It wasn't the Indians who didn't want them exposed. It was the Smithsonian Institute. And especially in 1920s and 30s, the man who took over didn't want these bones to be shown because he believed it cast doubt on the theory of evolution. But you get this book, it will absolutely blow you away. The next question is, how did giants get to North America? You know, I'm going to have to do a special show on that. There's a number of reasons. Some believe that when the Tower of Babel happened and God split the world, split these nations up, that some came over here, maybe through the Phoenicians. And we know that the Phoenicians, who were related to the Philistines, they traveled everywhere. We found stuff all in Italy and Sardinia, all in Europe and everything. We know that the ancients traveled all over, and it could it be that that was one way they came to this country. All I know is these Indians, hundreds of these, and there are thousands of Indian tribes, said the same thing. Their forefathers had to fight giants. I thought about one story where these red-haired giants were coming and periodically stealing their babies, stealing the women, eating them, cannibalism. And they finally said, that's it. They cornered them in a cave where they lived, and they set the fire to the cave. And long story short, I can't remember everything. It's off the top of my head. But basically it killed these giants. And it wrote stories and legends, right, and mythology on what happened to the giants who caused nothing but trouble for these tribes. You got to get this book. Get this book. I think it might absolutely blow your mind. But what got me is the actual documents and the actual articles that they pulled up. Even our early explorers, some of the famous explorers wrote in their diary about running into giants. Some 7 feet, 8 feet, 9 feet, and more. And it wasn't gigantism. No, gigantism, didn't say it right. But we know that's a disease, and they die young. But this is different. This is very different. We got to get it. Okay, so let me conclude. I believe the origin of all the accounts of mythology and legends and all these Greek gods, I think we can make a good case that these go all the way back to the first source. The first source is the biblical account in the book of Genesis, and we also see it throughout the Old Testament. We not only see giants in Genesis 6, but what does the Bible say? He says, and afterwards. So somehow, these giants were not only there during the time of Noah, but even after the flood, the giants were resurrected somehow. And I think I have a video on that. I'm going to have to make sure I maybe do another video. And there's 2 or 3 ways that they could have come back as well. And we see giants all the way through the Old Testament, all the way to where David and his men. David not only killed Goliath, but his mighty men had to kill Goliath's 4 brothers as well and swept that out. And yet, through history, we see the same story over and over again. These hybrids, these giants, where the gods came down and had relations with women, and the titans and the demi-gods were born. Where? I believe the origin is the first source. And the first source is Genesis 6 in the Bible. Right? Not too long tonight. But we thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for subscribing. And we're working on now some great shows. We're going to have a show on the New Jerusalem. We're going to have all of our 4 horsemen of Revelation. All that's going to be put together, and you're going to be able to watch those as well. All right? Good night. God bless, and we'll see you next time.